Good evening and welcome to the GM Academy. What do we do here? Workshops. Workshop number 4, Designing a Plot Part 2. Another one that I'm really excited for. I'm starting to get the idea that I'm pretty much just excited for all of them. But this one especially because we are going to build off of the last section that we did, which was the 8 steps to building a plot. So if you don't see a plot part 1, I'm not good at naming things. So plot part 1 was the 8 steps to building a plot, and plot part 2, which is the workshop we're doing right now, is going to build off of that. If you have not seen the 8 steps to designing a plot, I highly encourage you to go and watch that video now. A lot of what we're going to talk about is designed off having an understanding of that, and this all builds off of that knowledge. So if you haven't seen it, click down below the side wherever these links are, and go watch part 1 of this. But without further ado, we are going to get into the 4th workshop here at the GM Academy, and that is Designing a Plot Part 2. Like I said, we're going to go into a lot more detail on how to flesh out sort of these 8 steps, some of the do's and don'ts, a lot of good information like that. As always, we have a panel of guests here with us that will be live to answer questions, to address anything, and of course share stories and everything like that. So we're going to just do a brief introduction of a couple people down here. If you would, just give your name, how long you've been DMing, and what your current system that you're running in. So if we'll get an introduction from Renegade.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. Very glad to be here. I'm Renegade. I've been DMing for about 2 years, and I'm always looking to home Minecraft. I run a lot of Pathfinder, some Star Wars, used to run Warhammer, and that's about it. So thanks for having me.
Wonderful. And next up we have Nathan. And Nathan, what are you playing right now?
Just normal, a little bit of 3.5 and a lot of 4th edition. I've been DMing for a little over 6 months and playing for a little over a year, so I'm quite new compared to a lot of you guys here.
Wonderful. You're my 4th edition brother there, absolutely. And we have Malik. I'll get an introduction from Malik, one of our regulars.
Yeah, hey everybody. This is Malik again. I've been GMing for about a total of 6 months too, Nathan, and I've been playing for technically about a year in total. I mean, give or take like 2 or 3 months on the actual GMing. But I've generally been playing for a year in total, and it's good to mostly Pathfinder, and I've been trying to get into other systems, but mostly Pathfinder.
Okay, wonderful. Well, that is our panel, and we are going to jump in here to Designing a Plot Part 2. So we'll get the screen share going. Just to give a brief overview, of course, of what we're going to talk about here this evening, the 5 big points that we're going to discuss is how to get the campaign started. Always a big issue, where to begin your story. How to keep the story moving forward once you begin it. How to get the characters keeping going through it. Incorporating the PC backstory and actions into the plot. This is probably the most requested thing that I've had outside of designing a plot itself, is how do we get the PCs and what they want to do involved in the story. And we're going to go into quite in depth on that this evening. Giving the PCs a power of choice is another very important thing, and then common things to watch out for in a plot, because there are a lot of really common missteps that we're going to get into. So the first thing that we are going to discuss here is how to get the campaign started. That pesky beginning, as I like to call it, because it seems to trip so many people up. So what I'd like to do before we sort of get into some of the thoughts I had on it, I was going to open it up to Renegade here first, just about what kind of stuff you've done in the past, and maybe a story of how you've started a campaign.
Well, one campaign that I remember starting, because it was quite a memorable start, it started off in a temple where the players were being sacrificed, and that was just the beginning. And I had 7 players, 5 of them were actually there to do some sacrificing, and they were the evil aligned, and 2 of them were the good aligned players, and they were to be sacrificed. So I remember in that instance, we had some crazy things go off, and the good players they weren't too happy at the situation. They didn't know what was happening. So I think it was pretty memorable.
All right, wonderful. And then likewise, we'll get another story. Malik, of course, you said you've got a good story from where one of your campaigns began.
Yeah, actually, I started my campaign in a town that would later go on to a village, that would later go on to a tunnel area. But the way I set that up was by creating a situation where I just let all the PCs, they already had their character sheets set up, so I just let them all come. We all collaborated a day before the campaign, and I just let them help them work on their backstory. like where their characters were, what they were doing, what was going on, how did they all end up getting to that town, like how did they meet each other, stuff like that.
Okay.
And I
Wonderful. Thank you, Malik. Yeah, and that's actually one of the first things that we're going to touch on is the question of where to start a campaign is always an interesting one because there's sort of a dichotomy between whether whether GMs would like to, sort of start a game fresh, whether they do a session zero, as many people call it, and work together on building backstory. One of the first points I like to make when designing it, again, our focus here this evening is on plot and running a plot, and there's a whole workshop worth of information on what you want to do as far as stuff before the first session. But one of the big things that I always hold to is PCs get to decide why their character is involved in the story, not if their character is involved. And this is a very important
I think we're getting just a little bit of feedback or on the mic. I think you need to check the cord real quick. It sounds like we're kind of slipping and losing you. We don't want to lose any of the information.
Okay.
Anything else with that weird feedback?
Yeah, I can hear it.
Okay. We're all trying a new mic out, guys. Sorry. And I think it just kind of sounds like it's slipping a little bit.
Okay, let me see if that makes it any better for you.
Yeah, that's perfect.
It went away. Perfect,
Okay.
man.
Wonderful. Anyway, as I was saying, apologize for the technical difficulties there. The big thing to understand is the first concept that I bring into it is PCs get to decide why their character is involved, not if their character is involved with the story. And there's a very important distinction here in that when they are making their backstory and you're telling them in a general sense what your story is going to be, we are going on, a pirate quest and that's why we're playing 7th Sea or whatever general information, my number one rule is your character needs to write a story for why they are doing this. Again, not if they are doing this, not they're being drug along to do that. You need to tell them it is your responsibility to tell me why your character is here. And I have a good story of I told a person just this, and the person came back to me and said, well, actually, my character's not interested in this story. He's doing this, this, and this doesn't interest him. And I go, that's wonderful. Set that character sheet aside, roll me up a new character that is interested in doing this campaign. Because if you're not interested in doing the campaign, we have a problem right from the get-go. And that is one of the big things I emphasize to players is make sure your character wants to be involved with this. They want to go on this. I'm not going to use the word quest. We'll talk about the dirty word quest later on. But ensure your players know you want to have a character that's interested, not a disinterested loner that is just going along to go along. They need to be interested in the story. Ensure that right from the get-go. The other thing to wrap into that is PC should be involved because of their backstory, not because of happenstance. I am a big proponent against having a story start with the PCs accidentally stumble into plot, begin plot. Because, again, there's no level of investment there. There's no level of care. There's no driving force to them. They got swept up in something, which honestly can be fine for a campaign down the road when the party's already established, they're already together, they're going to stick together no matter what. But to start a campaign where, people busted into the town and arrested everyone, your people are arrested. Well, why does your characters have any motivation other than escaping the situation? They don't. Because they're there through happenstance. And I would highly encourage people to avoid doing that. What you want to do is give clear direction as far as where the story is going. That is one of the big things. Clear direction from the get-go, what your players are doing, why they are doing it, and how they're going to start. Now, again, this matters more if you're starting from an early campaign, your first play session with this group. If you've got an established group and this is your third or fourth plot arc, there's a lot more leeway to mess with that. But if you're starting out with a brand new group in a brand new setting and you're running something, give them clear direction. And you will note I'm not making a difference whether it's a linear plot, a mini sandbox, or a true sandbox. No matter what there is, they need direction. They need a purpose, and they need a backstory tied into that direction and purpose. And those are the first couple things you're looking at for starting a plot. You want people to be invested in the beginning. If they're not invested in the beginning, the middle and end are only going to be weaker. So that's one of the big things. Make sure there's investment. Another big concern with starting, and this is perhaps some personal issue, some experience issue, I'm against starting in a place that forces the PCs to do something. Do not start a campaign where you're arrested and thrown in jail, or these are sort of some of the campaign tropes. You're in a coliseum and you have to fight your way out, or you're arrested from the pirate ship. It always seems to be arrested. Again, maybe that's just me, I don't know. But what you want to do is you want to give purpose, direction, and starting. You don't want to just drop them in a situation where this is now what you're doing. Because, again, that's happenstance, and it doesn't give them that in-character engagement into the story to really hook them in. So having said a whole bunch of stuff about what you don't do, you get into what I feel you should do. And one of the nice things about tabletop and group play in general is you're not caught with the confines that most novels do or that movies do of you have to grab them right from the beginning. They need to walk into an action scene. There has to be something that is of incredible interest that is going on. But what you can do is you can start slow. You can start with narration. You can start getting them into the campaign, because if you've done the proper steps before, they're already invested. They've already made a backstory. They know why they're invested in the campaign, and it's fine to start slow. Start at the natural beginning, being told, this is, you're taking the one true ring to Mordor, whatever the case is. That's completely fine to start with. You don't need a big action scene. You don't need to start with, and you're in prison and the warden's beating you, and what do? You don't need all of that with tabletop, because you've got them for 3-4 hours, and you just have to engage them in that 3-4 hours. You do not need to give them that immediate start or the in media res, as if I'm pronouncing it anywhere close to correct, in the middle of the action. You don't need to start that way with the tabletop. Start at the natural beginning point, even if it's a slow point for the story. As one of the big things in understanding that sort of pesky beginning, it is the foundation of everything you're going to do with plot. If you do not establish the foundation of your story, you're going to have issues. You're going to have problems later on. Establish that foundation. Get them engaged from the beginning, because everything else is just a crapshoot if you don't do that. So that's the beginning. That's my advice. You notice I'm not going to tell you start with these things because they're great, because there's 100 different good ways to start a story. The understanding is laying that base level of expectation and building everything off of that. So from determining that pesky beginning, then you want to start moving the story forward. And how you get them from this is the story, we've presented you information, to now go little ones, go explore my world, go explore what I put together, interact with the plot, everything like that. You want to move the story forward. And the way to move the story forward is give them that sense of mystery and discovery, and you always want them thinking in their mind, what is going on here? Just a little thought to instill in their mind that something is different, something is out of place, something doesn't quite add up. And I'll give the story I've talked in past workshops a lot about. I do the introductory campaign for D&D 4th, and one of the big things that I do with that is the players get to town. It's a pretty standard mayor of the town hiring you to do a mission to catch a thief. And they go out and they sort of get this information, and it's a tiefling who's a big horn guy that sits on a throne, so there's a little bit of kind of what's going on there. But as soon as they start going into the town and asking around about this thief Tazul, everyone is really open and goes, oh yeah, that's the governor's the governor's daughter. And the players just immediately have this, wait a second, he didn't tell me anything about a daughter. All of a sudden, now there's this sense of something bigger is going on here than we understand. And we're caught in this situation of, do we go back and directly ask him what's going on? Do we keep investigating further? It drives the plot. They were invested in completing this mission for gold or for whatever story's sake, and now they're going, something bigger is happening here. And it can be done with such a small little amount of, it's the typical story of Mayor trying to bring his daughter back in, but he's calling her a thief and calling her a thing, and just by omitting that from the beginning, it gives that sense of, why is he hiding it? And it allows the players to use their imagination to flesh out the story and then go searching through the story to find facts. And that's how you get them moving forward. Engage them from the beginning, give them a sense of mystery, and let them move forward on their own. That is how you will truly get a good engagement from it. Through this, the next thing you're going to do is lead your character through the various acts of the story. Our 3-act structure that we talk about. You know, it's really simple. You've got a beginning. You've got, and again, the second act I still say is split into 2. You've got the PC's climax. You've got the PC's rise, the villain's rise, and then the ultimate finale. And you want to engage them through this story to develop and, on their own, move through the various plots. So what we talked about was you have your beginning, which is information, getting them the basic information, understanding what's going on in town, understand what's going on with the villains, going through all of that, and they're going to naturally explore on their own. The next thing that you're trying to encourage them to do is get them to then succeed at what they're trying to do. If they're trying to find the witch and trying to kill her out in the woods to save the town, they need to go and succeed against their minions, chase the witch out, the witch flees, what have you. They need to succeed. And through their natural exploration of the story, they are going to find that situation, and you're going to give it and let them succeed and let them win. And then while they're in the swamp, while they're fighting the witch, once they've beaten her and they feel really good, they come back to town and realize that the town was sacked while they were away because they were following this lead and forgot about another one. And then the villains come in with reinforcements, and then they hit them hard, and it ends up in being, while still the battles can be won, it's a defeat for the heroes. It's a setback in the story. The villains have become stronger, and that gives you your set of tension to then go into the finale and resolve all of the tension that you built up in hopefully the biggest climactic battle of all time, or whatever your story is appropriate to handle. So that is sort of again, the 3-act structure, and if you do that beginning right and you get that sense of intrigue right, they will naturally flow through these plot lines and just absolutely love the story without even realizing what they're doing. Couple things to look out for when you're doing this. One of the big #1 things, it's what I say, avoid the missing key. And this gets into plot fluidity, and that's the other big topic that we're going to discuss here. The missing key situation is when the PCs need the missing key to advance the story, and until they find it, they can't move forward. So the obvious example is the next story event to happen is in the basement of this building, and the door is locked, magically locked, and the only way to get through it is to find the right key. So you have to scour the town, and the DM knows that that key is in a wine crate in the basement of the tavern, and only the tavern guy knows it because he's in league with the assassins, or whatever your story is. The problem with this is then you hit a situation of the players can't advance, and you can run into player frustration of, what do? We know we want to be in the basement. We know that's where we have to do to move the story that you've engaged us forward, but you've put a roadblock that we do not know how to handle. There is a missing key. While this was a great mechanic for video games, board games, what have you, in tabletop, it just frustrates players. Now, if they know how to solve it, then it's an event. Then it's taking them to the next story. But it's when they don't know what they need to do or don't know where they need to go to solve the issue that you really have these kinds of problems pop up. One of the big ways to handle this, it's what I call keeping story fluidity. And the big thing to understand with story fluidity is the locations where things happen, you can move around. You're the DM. You know what's happening behind the story. If they're looking for this missing key to the basement and you know that it's in the wine cellar and they're looking everywhere else but the wine cellar, guess what? The key can be in a different crate. The key can be in the mayor's office. It's your world. You can move it around however you want. And that's something that a lot of DMs and GMs kind of shy away from because they have this picture of, here's the world, here's how it's laid out, here's how everything happens. It's sandbox. A lot of times it comes in this way. How should they set up these kind of worlds where geographically here's where everything happens? I'm personally against that because then you run into issues. You want to let PCs walk into the events. Let them go wherever they want to go. You want to go to the tavern, you want to go out to the horse stalls, you want to go out wherever. My assassin encounter where they come and attack you is going to happen no matter where you go. If you go down in the basement and check the door, that's where the assassin was hiding. If you go out in the stables, that's where the assassin was hiding to get you. It's story and geographically fluidity. It's allowing yourself to adapt to what they're doing. And a lot of people see that as perhaps railroading or linear plot, and there's nothing wrong at all with linear plot. And to a degree, what I'm saying is, but the thing to understand is this is the way human beings understand story. We move from event to event. We don't move from event to inaction. You read any novel, and they have the group has 3 paths to go, and they pick one. They never pick the path that just is a clear dandelion-filled path straight to the next town where nothing happens, because that would be boring. It would be unengaging. It would be realistic. But we have to understand realism does not always equal fun. As a matter of fact, it very frequently stands in the way of fun. What you are trying to do is give them events and engage the 8 kinds of fun, which is next thing that we're getting into. But before we jump into that, let me throw it out to Malik or Renegade or Nathan. Did anyone has ever used sort of that the missing key effect, the barrier to moving forward, have had any interesting ways to avoid kind of doing that thing?
Yeah, actually, I was about to mention it, but I had burped, and then I decided to stop talking. But that situation that I was talking about earlier was basically the PCs were originally looking for bandits because they believed the bandits were involved in a plot to murder the king's family as well as himself on an evening trip. So the PCs were holed up at a little time in that town that I had mentioned earlier, but they were just kind of doing odd jobs around in order to wait for the bandits to arrive at that town so they could potentially ambush them. But the situation was that a young merchant had hired them to go check on his grandfather to see if he was still, or was it his uncle? Either ways, to see if he was still all right, because he hadn't heard from him in several weeks or months. And then when the PCs came in, the house was completely empty. They had no idea what had happened to the man. But there was a maid there, as well as I left several clues around the house, so even if they didn't hit one, they could have easily hit any of the other ones around the house. But they found the maid, who smacked one of the PCs in the face with a frying pan, and eventually let them know that the uncle had become possessed by some type of crazy demon sort of thing. So the PCs then tried to investigate this underground lair that this insane magical uncle was building. And upon finding it, they got into a big battle with him. And eventually what was found out is that the uncle then, once he was defeated, turned into this kind of Oompa Loompa person. Okay? So now the PCs were incredibly confused. And then out steps...
I'm just going to stop you there because at the beginning you isolated the point so clearly, I think, of what you said. They were looking for the key, and you essentially gave multiple locations for the key. They were going to find it no matter what. And then from there they built to, and of course I know you were just saying you were building the level of intrigue from there, which is the perfect way to do it, I feel. But yeah, exactly that. Make sure there's always a way to move forward. There is nothing worse than the group not knowing how to progress the story when they want to progress the story. It is just frustrating, and there is no level of enjoyment that ever comes from that. Great example. Thank you for that, Malik. So moving into sort of the next section here, once you've got them engaged, once you've got them moving forward through your 3 or 4 act structure, as it were, the next thing you want to start looking at is engaging these 8 types of fun. And for those who have watched the 8 types of fun video, you know what I'm talking about. For those who don't, you see I have the checklist here. And I legitimately do this. I keep a checklist in my campaign of the 8 kinds of fun. And you'll notice submission I have a red X in because I hold submission is at odds with the tabletop experience. So I do not try and actively engage submission, but I try and engage the other 7. And what I do is I don't need to hit all 7 of these in each campaign. But what I want to do is I want to hit more than one, and I better hit all 7 by the time I hit the end of the plot. And again, from the first video, we talked about plot being 15 to 20 hours. For me, 4 to 5 play sessions. By that time, I want to have heavily engaged in all 7 of these, probably multiple times. But I keep an active checklist of every time I engage one, I'll have multiple checks beside it because I want to see what am I hitting harder, what am I hitting easier, what types of fun, and how are the players responding to this. Because if I don't do this, then there can be something missing, and I can have that one player who is disinterested in the campaign. He might not even know why, but it's because I, as the DM, missed something. So I keep this checklist. I want to see how I've been doing with the 8 kinds of fun. So from there, of course, once you have your 8 kinds of fun, you want to look at designing events specifically to engage with these 8 kinds of fun. And I legitimately look into the events that make up the acts of my story. What am I trying to get across? The first act of the story, discovering what's happened. I want a big sense of discovery in this event. I want them to start exploring the town, the world, the rivers, the dungeons, whatever it is that we're in, and getting a feel for their environment. I definitely want a heavy focus on narrative. I'm a narrative person, so narrative is going to be throughout the whole thing, but I want them to start the process of narrative. Again, narrative people want that beginning, middle, and end. I need to give them that beginning. I want to start the concepts of fantasy in there. I want them to start feeling immersed into the world. That one's going to take time. It's not going to happen until Act 2 or Act 3 or even the finale, but if I start it sooner, they'll get in there easier. Expression is going to come out from the players as they get more and more comfortable, but the more they get involved with everything else, the more you will see expression start coming out. Challenge. Challenge is one I normally don't get into till Act 2 or normally Act 3. Again, I follow the 4-act structure on it. And what I want to do is bring in challenge when it's appropriate. When it's time for the villains to have their rise in my Act 3 of the 4-act structure, that's when I bring in challenge. That's when it becomes difficult. That's when I start engaging that aspect of fun. I normally don't engage it early on. And again, that's my own personal choice, but what I want to emphasize to you is understand when you're engaging these different types of events. And there will actually be an entire workshop where we're going to go through individual examples of how specifically to engage these 8, so I'm not going to touch on that too much more, but understand and keep track of when you are engaging these types of fun. And yes, we talked about it in the last workshop about the 8 kinds of fun. You can engage multiple ones simultaneously. So just keep that always in mind. And another thing to understand about it is completely fine if a scene within your acts of the structure only focuses on one type of the fun. If we just have a scene that is just on challenge, that's fine. But you want to understand how long that is. I would never go more than an hour focusing on any one, or else you're going to lose the people that's not interested in. But as long as each player gets to enjoy their type of fun within a play session, they will all leave the table happy. So again, I could talk the 8 kinds of fun all night. I've already done it once. I'll end up doing it again. But keep track of your 8 kinds of fun as you're building out your plot, when you're going to engage it, how often you engage it. Let's see. We have people that are on the live chat that I believe had a question. Keegan, do we have a question from them?
Yeah, we have one that's from Lee. It's what to do when the PC kill or capture an important villain unexpectedly.
Adapt, improvise, overcome, I believe, is the go-to logic on that. But it is a fantastic question, and that is when you are building your events, what happens if they do something that is completely out of left field? You've given them the villain, and whatever. We actually had a story, I believe it was from one of the coffee shops, of someone throwing the vial of acid and rolled a natural 20 against the big baddie's face and killed him and ruined his whole, the whole story, or the direction the story was going to go. And that's fine. It is completely understandable and engaging, and these things happen. The big thing to understand is when this kind of event happens, the PCs love it. They influence the story in a way the DM did not expect. And I have, for my favorite campaign, of course, everyone knows I'm a big L5R fan, and my face-to-face game that we've been going for 3 years at this point on, early in the campaign, a really interesting event happened. I introduced them to the big baddie. I introduced them to, for my L5R fans, Daigotsu. They found Daigotsu himself. And he's the big baddie, super powerful wizard, for lack of a better term. And, they engaged him, and the idea was that they were going to run and flee from his awesome power. And what happened was he presented his side of the argument that he believed he was rightful emperor, and to my surprise, the PCs looked at him, went, "You make a good point," and just instantly on a dime switched sides. And I was sitting there just like this. And I literally took what I had written and I tossed it to the side and said, "It's time to go." because it was and we just went with the story from there. Everything I had planned for the second half of the story was gone out the window because it no longer made sense, and I had to stop and completely readapt my story to what was happening. And the big thing I do, and we're going to talk a little bit more about analyzing your plot later on, but what I did is analyze the story I had told up into that point and then build a new half to it. So if you run into a section where all of a sudden they can completely change what's going to happen, allow that change to happen. Never retcon it. Never diminish its effect, because then you're going to steal that experience from the PCs. Allow it to happen and change your story accordingly. And that's where we're getting to the next thing, which is incorporating PCs into your plot design. And we're going to show it up here on the screen, and I want to hammer this point home for everyone who sees it, and I want everyone to repeat after me. You don't have to be on the microphone. The PC's backstory is better than my story. The PC's backstory is better than my story. The PC's backstory is better than my story. I want you all, if there's anything to take away from this, it's that statement right there. Everything that you have written in your story, everything that you want to do, is not as good as what they have already done. And the reason for this, whenever a PC writes a backstory, whenever they get engaged in the story that they've made of their character, they're already at 100% engagement. That's what you're striving for with your story. If they're already there, let them be there. That is the story to them. It is better than your story because they are more engaged in it. And that's one of the big things to understand. All of this work about PC backstory, I want PC backstory so I can work them into the plot. Good, outstanding. Understand their backstory supersedes your plot. Yeah. Heavy words, and let me explain exactly what I mean when I say that. When I'm building a plot and I write out, here's the 4-act structure, here's the combats that are going to happen, and all of the various different things, and you know the villain is going, or the guy who keeps track of the horses at the stable, he's going to be the guy who's working with the assassins and tipping them off every time they go in and out of the stables. And then one of my PCs rolls up that he loves animals and specifically loves foxes. And his character has an affinity for foxes. His story's better than mine. So, all of a sudden, my guy who takes care of the horses character is gone. He's sidetracked because now I have to incorporate liking foxes as a backstory. So now what we have is we have a hunt master who takes people out on fox exchanges. He will still have the same piece of my story, so I'm incorporating the PC's backstory, but the PC's idea is better than mine because they're already engaged in it. And that's the big thing I want to understand about incorporating backstory. Take what they've given you and put it into what you've already done, and put it into what you plan on doing. That is one of the big things, because if you ignore that, then you really run the risk of player disengagement, and you want them to be involved. So I will say it over and over again. The PC's backstory is better than your story. The next thing to look at is who the PCs interact with. Pay very close attention to this. You're going to see PCs that for some reason, they just find an NPC that they love, that they absolutely love, and that's their person. And I'll admit it, I'm about the worst in the world about this. I always find some irrelevant NPC, and apparently they have to have, not the GM, if they didn't name the person before like the event of us first meeting them, that's the person. That's my favorite person in the world. The squire that's going to fetch me the books in the library that you just came up with the name of, I'm going to be invested with him, and it is my personal mission as a player in your game to make him important to the story, because that's the kind of person I am. But what you really want to pay attention to is players like me, because you're going to have players like me, and you're going to have a lot of players that get engaged with certain NPCs and really enjoy interacting with them. It just works for whatever reason. Make those people important. If the villain was the king's son going into your story, and suddenly your people just absolutely hate the blacksmith with all of their passion for no reason at all, guess what? Change the story. Make the blacksmith. They already hate him. You want to build a villain, make it the people that they hate. Your story is fluid. You can change and adapt to what interests them. You want to lead them in a direction, but you want to adapt to what interests them most. And what interests them most is their own interaction with things, their own backstory that they write. These are what they're engaged in. You always want to follow that engagement, nurture that engagement. The other big thing to understand when building your plot is, and PC interaction with it, allow the PC's action to reverberate through the world. Let it actually have meaningful change. If they went and broke up the bandit lords that were harassing the shipments that come through, when they go to the marketplace, the people should hail them as heroes. They cleaned out the bandit lords. Profits are soaring. Gold is flowing. They take him out to drinks, what have you. Inversely, if they just, killed someone who was a legitimate bad guy but liked in the town, people should boo and hiss them. There should be reverberating effects from everything that they do. They should feel that they changed the world. That is one of my big things. At the end of a story arc, I want my players to feel like their actions change the world. If they don't feel that way, what did they do it for? Their own personal story? Yeah, they might have gotten some enjoyment from that. But if they feel that they're affecting a world, you get that fantasy engagement, that elusive one that's so hard to grasp. And if you can get them into that, everything else fits so well. So make sure their actions reverberate to the rest of the world. Next section that we're going to talk about, sort of moving on from there. And again, if at any point anyone has any questions, by all means, jump on in here. But the next section that we're going to get into is less is more. Avoid over-description of plot and NPCs. Now, this is important, and this is something that a lot of people mess up on. A lot of people, when they walk into a room, your PCs, or walk into a town, or walk into a river, I guess if your PCs do that kind of thing, they go into a whole bunch of detail, a huge narrative about they walk into this room and the painting's this, and there's a giant painting on the wall, and there's a lion embossed on the side, and Tywin Lannister's standing in the corner, and he's finally taken the rightful throne because he deserves it, and all of that. And it's great to give some description. They need to understand where they are, but it's the over-description that's a problem. So I use Stephen King's advice from writing on this of when you walk in a room, there's 3 things that you pay attention to. Again, it's me. I always come up with magical numbers, and 3 seems to be one of them. I tell my PCs 3 things. Who's in the room, basic size of the room, and an interesting detail. You walk into a big open throne room. Sitting up on the throne is the king. It has the red velvet on either side. Guards line the halls. You understand where you are. You understand what's going on. You understand the focus. From there, I allow them to look at the stonework that's 1,000 years old and was carved by hand by forces that they don't even understand. I allow them to explore and discover this. If I just tell them everything that's going on in the room, I don't allow discovery. I'm just narrating to them. If I allow them to inspect the statues and go through and look at the old runes and all of that on their own, then they get that sense of discovery. It engages that type of fun for them. If you just broad description everything, you lose it. And a lot of people really, it feels uncomfortable not giving as much detail because you want to get that picture in your mind, in their mind. And here is the big secret to it. It applies to writing. It applies to not so much movies, but tabletop, anything that's theater of the mind. You are not trying to get your people to see your vision. You are trying to get your people to see a vision. You want to give them a vivid image of what's happening before them, even if it's not exactly what you think. Yes, if there's 2 guards blocking the doors with axes, they need to know that specifically, and everyone needs to be clear on that. But as far as what the stone looks like, what the old ragged carpet looks like, what the king's wife with the long face and the wrinkly neck looks like, describe what you can, but understand you don't need to give them your image. They just need a clear image that rings for them, and let them discover the rest as they go on. It's so very important. Less is more. The other big thing is this applies equally to the plot itself. When people walk into town, I am very much against going, this is the king, and this is, welcome to Dragonforge Town. This is the king, and he's engaged to his wife, and it's a bitter engagement, and the son doesn't like that, and all the townspeople talk about this, and it's cause trade issues. And when you just run that down, you took every bit of fun out of exploring this town and interacting with the people, because you just took it from them. Allow them to come into town, allow them to discover and explore this stuff, give them that sense of what's going on here, and they're going to dive right into it. Do not steal that experience from them. Allow them to go out and find that experience. It's wonderful. Okay, moving along, we have giving the PCs the power of choice. This is another really big one that a lot of people understand when it goes wrong, but don't necessarily understand why it goes wrong. And that is sort of at the end of a plot arc, when everything's done, when it's all wrapped up. And the PCs are kind of like, yeah, that was fun. I mean, we got to kill the bad guy. It was good. One of the things that can be missing with this is that they felt they had meaningful choice and meaningful influence in the outcome of the story. They must feel that way. And I said it before, they need to feel that they changed the world. They need to feel that they had a decision in what happened on the outcome. If there's a situation where you have a plot, and I was talking to a DM a few months ago about this, where he had a plot where players did not like it at the end of the story. Everything was going good right up to the end of the story. And it was a story of two warring kingdoms. And they fought back and forth with each other, and the PCs were heavily involved with the kings and jesters, and then ultimately, the side of the PCs won. And what the issue was is the PCs did not affect that victory. Yeah, they were rooting for the good guys, but they did not directly cause that victory. Again, that's realistic. 3 people in an army of thousands are going to cause the victory? Probably not. But we play in a game of fantasy, and we're trying to engage types of fun. If they do not think that they have accomplished something, that they have changed something, why were we here playing this? If our good guy side was going to win because you would determine that it win, why did I play through this plot? I could have read the book, so to speak. Give them choice. They need to determine the outcome. When you are planning your finale, you need to plan that the PC's action are going to determine what the outcome of the story is. And my personal way of doing this, I run a lot of heavy political games, and what I ultimately come down to is there will be 2 or more forces in conflict, and whoever the PCs side with are going to determine who wins the conflict. And on a base core level, that's what I have. That's my little box of plot. I start with, who are these interesting characters that are at odds with each other? They are going to bid for power to try and get the PCs to help them, and whoever the PCs help probably win. Now, if the PCs lose the fight, then they lose, and that their side lost because of it. But the PCs are the one who's determining the outcome. You have to give them that. If the PCs felt like they were just along for the ride, you are going to destroy them at the end. And that was the discussion I had with this DM of everything was perfect. All the beats were hit. Everything was great up until the end. And when it ended, there was just this sense of, ugh. And the reason being, because they didn't get to choose it. They were just along for the ride. They didn't think they were, but at the end they found out they were along for the ride. Giving the PCs the power of choice. Give them options for ways to dramatically affect the story. One of the other things I want to say with this, and this applies more to encounters and even to this regard, anytime you give players a choice, you must be okay with them choosing either option. Because this is another thing that comes around, especially when DMs start falling in love with their own NPCs. Another story, had a DM completely fell in love with his NPC. It was the villain. Great villain, sort of an anti-hero type thing, had a lot of redeeming qualities, everything of that nature. And when it came time for the final battle, the PCs sort of had the moral dilemma of, this guy can be reformed. Should we kill him? Should we not kill him? And they had a dilemma. And the GM did not want this character to die. The players decided they couldn't look past all of his bad deeds and had to kill him. And what did the DM do? He tried to convince them, hey, you can reform him. Have you seen the good stuff? They go, yeah, we understand this. We want to kill him. But are you sure you want to? After a few minutes of discussion, it turned into, yes, we're going to kill him. Ultimately, the DM let them kill him, and then the DM sort of haphazardly brought him back in the next campaign. Terrible thing to do. The PCs felt they had no option. He had to live. I was quite familiar with that because I was the DM of that campaign. I fell in love with my NPC villain. I didn't want him to die. I had more story stuff I wanted to do. But I ruined the experience for my players because I refused to let that NPC die. And when I brought him back, it just felt like he hadn't died, and they didn't have a choice. I know that one very firsthand. Could have been a great campaign that I just took the wind out of it. Just an amateur mistake, and I wouldn't want anyone to commit that again. So make sure the PCs have choice in what happens. Oh, goodness gracious. So once you've gotten through the choice, the finale, you've taken them through all of the steps, you've gotten them to the end, and it's great, and you've had this awesome, awesome time. Every now and then, when you do everything just right, and everything comes out technically perfect, the players aren't interested. They just aren't into the campaign. You've looked at it, you've done it all, you've gone through the whole gambit, and they're just not interested in the campaign. What do you do? And trust me, if you DM long enough, it's going to happen to you. Couple things on dealing with player disinterest. The big thing you want to do is analyze your campaign. Analyze what's happened. Because 9 times out of 10, when there is player disinterest, it's because you're missing a type of fun in there. You're not engaging the way one or certain players want to play. Or your story's not up to par. There's something missing. There's inconsistencies in it that are pulling them out. Analyze what's happened. Anytime you have player disinterest, understand, is it an issue with the players themselves are not getting along? Is it an issue that the characters aren't engaged? Have I not told a story? Is it not accurate? Have I not been engaging certain types of fun? Analyze your story. And that's why through all these workshops, I want to give you a structure to go back that you can look at and see what's missing here. Because one of the common things I talked about in the first part of the plot is determining how long plot should be. And if everything is going right, but your plot is one big story arc that lasts a year and a half, you can just have player fatigue. Everything's going fine, but they're just sick of everything being fine and they never got conclusion. So, analyze your whole thing. Look at the 8 steps. Figure out what's missing. Look at your plot. Look through everything and figure out what's missing. Now, if you've gone through and looked at everything and they don't seem to be, anything that you can determine that's missing, it really leads you with 2 options. One, you can change the story. Start something fresh. Even if it's in the same story, take a new approach to it. Maybe you've just been in the world doing politics too long. I've never been guilty of that. But look at what's going on and adapt and just do something different. If they're not interested, just, okay, we've been doing politics all the time. Guess what? We're going north of the wall where all the Shadowlands creatures are. We're going to fight Oni with big tentacles and Oni the size of mountains, and let's have at it and just do something that's different from what we've been doing. You can try and do that. The other thing you can try and do, and this is one of my personal favorites here, what I call the throw rocks option. And I was so nice as even to do you all a little comic with my wonderful little drawing. And this is a simple thing. I'll tell you a story that was involved with this. And that is, when all else fails, literally throw rocks at your plot. I had a campaign that got derailed actually because of a horrible player. Killed all of the fun. The story was in pieces. People were not engaged in what was going on. It just wasn't working. And I didn't have a way how to salvage that. So what I did, I literally threw rocks at the campaign. The city that they were in got bombarded with rocks from the sky. And everything that they had engagement with, the evil prince villain, which is what they were trying to deal with in the good, the old senile king, all of these things that they had maybe a little tiny bit of interest in, all of a sudden the whole story changes of the prince that you thought was evil. Now he's empathetic and helping his townspeople because half of them were crushed by rocks. Now we have wolves in the town. We just literally throw calamity and change everything. And it's an extreme case. It worked out incredibly well for me because we were at a point where everyone was just like, can we even continue this? Because we literally had to kick a player who was kind of important to how the story was developing, and no one knew where to go. No one knew what their players should be doing. It was a lot of my faults, mostly as DM, for running things very disorganized. And how do we handle it? I literally tossed rocks at it. Made it a calamity situation, changed the whole world, and the players just lit up and jumped into it, and it was the worst disaster of a campaign I ever ran and the best save I ever did from one. So I like to say, all else fails, just throw rocks at it. And do wonderful art, apparently. So then we're going to get into, with our last couple minutes here, and again, if anyone had any sort of questions, we're going to kind of get into some just general do's and don'ts around campaigns. So if anyone has any questions, by all means, jump in. And if Keegan, if we've got any questions from the audience, by all means, you can jump in at this point with them.
We had one that was from Malfane. It says, assuming you're doing a true sandbox, at what point should you let your players get behind the wheel and drive the narrative?
As soon as physically possible. That is my opinion on that. Them driving the story is what you're going for. You want engagement in it. And the real idea of a sandbox, and we're going to do a workshop on sandbox as a whole, but one of the big ideas with the sandbox is you want players, or to give players a plethora of options. Instead of giving them one story beginning, you are giving them a whole bunch, and they can choose which one that they're interested in. And there's good and bad things to be said about that. But once they have found something that they're interested in and they want to move forward with it, I believe that's when you start putting the blinders on. You know, if you've got 3 whole separate different stories that are not interconnected within a city, and they hone in on one and want to do that, start making it more about that. Yes, if there was supposed to be a big parade that was part of story number 2 that has nothing to do with story number 1, guess what? Plot fluidity. We can just make that never happen if it's going to get in the way of what you're doing. You want to give them some kind of focus. And again, I'm not going to touch too. It's a great question that's going to be more for when we do the specific workshop on linear plots versus sandbox plots, because there's a lot of sort of do's and don'ts and ways to do that. Fantastic question, but I hold get to doing, if they are interested and focused in going forward, let them go forward. Give them what they're interested in. Let them make it happen. So with that, a couple things to watch out for, sort of as we wrap up here in this this workshop. A couple big things to watch out for when we're doing your campaigns. One is what I call the silly campaign, and this is where everyone comes in and has fun with their characters. They name their character Derpy. They do all of these different random things to make it fun and ha-ha enjoyable. And there's nothing wrong with playing that way. That's enjoyable. I do it. They are fantastic for one-shots. What they are not good for is regular campaigns. You can do a one-shot. You can do a two-shot. You may even be able to stretch it to a 3. But if you want a story to continue, you cannot tell a story with silly characters. Unless you're running a system that's really meant for it, because there are a couple out there. They are directly detrimental, because what happens is they come out very organically, people love them, enjoy them, laugh, it was a great time. And then the next time you get back together, you try and do it again, but it doesn't have that magic, it doesn't have that spark, and people are forcing it. They're taking things too far. They're doing whatever they can to try and regain that spark, but that spark came from organic growth of comedy. And within trying to do a regular structured silly campaign, it will not work. Do not do a silly campaign if you intend to run a long-running story. Again, one-shots, two-shots, maybe even 3, absolutely, they're fantastic. But avoid the silly campaign if you're going for long-term. What I call, actually, I shouldn't say I call it because another DM friend of mine invented this, the term load-bearing boss. And a load-bearing boss, a lot of times this is more, I feel happens more often than sci-fi or not, but it happens with necromancers and all that as well. But the load-bearing boss is when you kill the boss, all of the minions die as well. And it feels really tired and really overused. And I'm going to tell you exactly why it's used. It's used to add tension to a finale. It's let me give a massive fight that your PCs have no hope of winning, but if you kill this one guy, then you win the whole thing. And that is exactly why it's used. And the problem with it is that's not really truly building up to an epic finale. That is just giving high difficulty at a tabletop and one path to a solution. There's no choice in there. It's you lose or you kill the one guy, and then everyone else dies. I very much hold avoid load-bearing bosses. Because, again, you have two options, character death or victory. There's really not a whole lot of way to do it because there's only one way to fight that situation. Not a fan of the load-bearing bosses. We already talked about this, but I'll mention it again. Barriers to plot progression. Nothing should ever stand in the way of plot, including defeat in battle. It should always move forward. We talked about the missing key. I'll give one other example. It is, you've got, we talked about this in one of our coffee shops. You have a situation where your PCs are trying to get to the town. And they have to go through a cave, and there's a bunch of spiders in the cave. When I said player choice and being happy with either choice, every encounter is a choice. It is a win or a loss, and there's a choice to be made. What happens if your players are just going to go through this nothing fight, kill these spiders, and get to town? And then they go through this fight, and they lose. They drag their buddies back out of there, but they're on the other side of the cave still, and you've already told them there's only the one way through. What can they do? They can only go back in and try and fight again. It is a barrier to plot progression. When you are building your encounters, when you are building your plot, you should understand anything that could happen with that has to progress the story forward. You could have it so if they lose, you know, the hunter comes into town who they were going to meet in town at the stables at some point later on. Apparently I'm all about stables tonight. And you can have him come in and kill them and save them. That's to a degree fine. I actually think there's some issues with that as well. But understand there should always be a way that the story moves forward, and do not intentionally, and watch out for unintentionally, building barriers to plot advancement. Always keep an eye out for that. Collection quests. Players have to go find 3 of these before they can unlock the magic seal to get it on. No. That is the realm of the video game. That is the realm of the MMO. That is submission-style enjoyment. No one that I have found enjoys doing that at a tabletop. Do not do the collect 3 MacGuffins to continue your story. It will get boring really, really quickly. Do not do collection quests. And speaking of that, I'm against the term quest. I hate the term quest, as a matter of fact. And I'll tell you why I hate the term quest. Because a quest is one single type of dramatic situation. If you remember our 36 dramatic situations, a quest is a specific dramatic situation. Going somewhere to get something to bring it back. That's a quest. That is not a plot. We talked about it in the other video. That is one aspect to a plot, but that is not a plot. It is nothing but a dramatic situation. And one of the common things I hear when people ask for advice on their plot is everyone just throws out quest ideas. Well, you could have them do this, or you could have them do this. That doesn't really fix anything. And I hate the term quest because it's going, here's what tabletop is. You go out and you collect loot and you bring it back. Sure, you can play tabletop that way. But if you want to tell an engaging story, if you want to engage the 8 kinds of fun, you're doing a plot. And you can do a quest plot, but if you just keep doing quest plot after quest plot after quest plot after quest plot, you're going to lose your characters. And for that reason, I hate the term quest. I want people to engage in a plot, in a story. This isn't a quest hook. This is the beginning of a story, and this is the beginning of a story, and this is the beginning of a story. Again, personal pet peeve there. 2 last things I want to touch here, and then I'll open up in a little bit of time that we have for a question. Never do a squash match. This comes from a wrestling term, as a matter of fact, a squash match, or forcing your players to job, for those of you who are really familiar with the term. And what this is having a battle that the players will lose. Used all the time, and it's terrible. A situation where the players are going to walk into a combat, and they are going to lose to the overpowered enemy, and that they don't have a choice. No one has ever said, I had so much fun because we got our asses kicked. I'm so passionate about this, I cussed. Never do that to players. They do not enjoy it. My very first play session that I ever DM'd, I did this to my players and they hated it. Again, almost everything I say as far as these things not to do, it's because I've done them. I've been there. Absolutely I have. You have to give your players a choice. If you give them no option, then there was no point in it happening. If the story was that they lost this fight and now they're in prison, start them in prison. I still disagree. I wouldn't do that. But if you're going to do it, don't make them live through the fight. Do not do it. Any player who's interested in challenge will be ruined, and you're going to ruin how they tell or how they interact with your story from that point forward, because then when they are losing a battle, they don't know if it's because they are doing bad or if this is a scripted loss. They don't know which one it is. And instead of making them fear their mortality more, they care about it less. Do not do the squash match. It always ends poorly. And the final thing along with that is what I call the do not touch the art aspect. And that is, do not put something in front of players that they are not allowed to interact with. So the common thing like this is the big baddie shows up and he's 10 levels higher than them. They should know better than interacting with it. No. You gave them the most interesting thing in the room. They're going to walk up and touch it. You can't hang the sign on it, touch this or die. Then there's no point in it being in your campaign. If you are going to set that up, you have to be aware, again, you are presenting the players a choice to interact with it or not interact with it, and you have to be fine with either option. There was a story, I can't remember if it's on the forums of GM Academy or one of the other forums that I'm on, of a dragon sleeping on a pile of treasure. And it was an elder dragon, and they were level 4 players. Should have known better than messing with this thing. And the players did, and they messed with it and got the gold. And there was a whole big issue about this that the GM had of, well, now I need to kill off my players or whatever. No. It was your mistake for putting the powerful dragon in there. Do not give me something interesting and then tell me I cannot interact with it. That is a mistake on the DM's part. Always assume the players either will or won't interact with something. And you have to be prepared for both options. And one of the prepared cannot be TPK. Do not do that. Okay, so we just got a little bit of time left. I'm going to open up. Does anyone have any questions before we take off?
I got a little bit of a story too. I like your rule about do not send players into a squash match, and I actually have a slightly different rule that I use. Is make it so that the players think they were in a squash match that they won, and they love it. Like I did this twice. And like I did actually a week ago where I sent just a whole bunch of enemies at my players, and they nearly lost. And after the combat occurred, they were like, "I think we're supposed to lose that. Like we were so close to death." They're like, "He was trying to kill us." And then they loved it. I thought that was great. And so it's kind of like a similar rule to what you described.
Wonderful, and I love that anecdote, and I'll just say one last thing before we close off. That is exactly what I try for, and I love that. I'm going to steal that concept. I know I'm going to use it in my next campaign, the squash match that they actually win, but that's what I'm going for when I talk about the end of Act 2, when I want the villains to be victorious. I'll have something like that happen where they're overwhelmed and they fight for their lives, and hopefully they just barely succeed, but in the meantime, they lost this important NPC, the town got sacked, what happened, because it gives that feeling of, there's the powerful enemy. They did something to me. They interacted with me, and now we have to find a way to beat them, and that's the motivation going into the finale, and I love doing just that kind of stuff. So with that, we are out of time at this point, so we're going to call it. This has been part 2 of course, our plot section. There will be a part 3, which will be really interesting. We are going to take the 8 steps. We're going to take everything we discussed tonight, and myself and a panel of DMs are literally going to sit down and make a plot using these tools. And that will be when we do part 3 of this. But that is everything for this evening. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please, if you, of course, are watching this, check out our other GM Academy workshop videos. Check us out on Facebook. Check us out on Twitter. And, of course, everything good that we're doing on Roll20 at GM Academy. It's been a pleasure. You all have a wonderful evening.